Hello everyone, it's Dr. Hurst again, Sam or Holly as you prefer. Today I'm using a different camera. I don't think the audio is so great, I'm not loving it myself, but I'm also hoping that this might be a little bit quicker to upload. What I'm going to be reading for you today is some excerpts, one long excerpt really, from what is often considered to be the first Gothic novel. Horace Walpole's The Castle of Otranto from 1764. There is some debate within the scholarly community, and there are some other contenders, including Longsword Earl of Salisbury, which I have a copy of here. This is from 1823. It's one of my favourite purchases, but I basically can't read it because it's so fragile. But look, it's so tiny, and the words are so tiny. Amazing. Anyway, it's certainly the first Gothic novel from the period which calls itself such, and also offers some sort of justification of what the Gothic novel of the period was trying to do. So, Horace Walpole originally published it as a translation, pretending it was written by a medieval monk or similar, and had been discovered. It was a found manuscript, in other words, which is quite a common framing technique that you find in the Gothic. He later re-released it, a second edition with a preface, which admitted to his authorship, and also explained a little bit what he was trying to do, what a Gothic novel was, in his opinion. He tells us that he was attempting to blend the two kinds of romance. I'm quoting here from the preface to the second edition. Attempt to blend the two kinds of romance, the ancient and the modern. In the former, always imagination and improbability. In the latter, nature is always intended to be, and sometimes has been, copied with success. So he's trying to match the wonder tales, the magic, the fancy and the imagination of the medieval romance with a capital R with the more modern novel. He says that there are bonuses and minuses to each. The old romances are fun, full of imagination, intriguing and interesting, but hardly realistic. The people act in ways which are frankly unbelievable. They speak in ways which are unbelievable. In the modern novel, however, he notes that although nature is paid attention to, what's quite often missing is that hint of fancy and intrigue. And so he's trying to do the two things at once. Create realistic characters, although that's really quite debatable, and add in as well some elements of the fantastic, from animated portraits to skeletal monks to giant arms just hanging around his castle. It's got it all, basically. What I'm wanting to do today with you guys is to just read some of the first chapter. So I had the intention of only doing short stories or poems, but I haven't read any of those today. So I feel like Castle of Otranto did deserve a little bit of a read together for the couple of us. I'm going to just read a couple of pages because I don't want to keep you here for too long. I'm going to cut off probably, in at about the 10-minute mark. I have a place that I want to get to. We'll see how it goes. I'm thinking it's 10 minutes. It might be half an hour, but I won't keep us that long. So anyway, enjoy with me. It's a trip. It's meant to be tongue-in-cheek. It's meant to be scary, but it's also fairly hilarious, I've always found. Certainly not perhaps what you're expecting if you're coming into the Gothic expecting women in beautiful dresses running away from haunted houses, and that's sort of the creepy, dark feel that you get from Dracula and Frankenstein, for example. It's quite a different feel to the thing when you're talking about the early Gothic, and particularly this one. There's an excess and an exaggeration which borders on the pathetic and the comic, as well as the scary. So anyway, I hope you enjoy reading along with me. I'm going to be reading from the book in my hands. It's just a Wordsworth edition. I wish I had a really cool one that I could impress you all with and be like, look at me, I'm a scholar, I have great editions. but unfortunately I don't. I've got the Wordsworth Classic, which cost me like £1. So there we go. Oh no, I've skipped to chapter 2. Manfred, Prince of Otranto, had one son and one daughter. The latter, a most beautiful virgin, aged 18, was called Matilda. Conrad, the son, was 3 years younger, a homely youth, sickly and of no promising disposition. Yet he was the darling of his father, who never showed any symptoms of affection to Matilda. Manfred had contracted a marriage for his son with the Marquis of Vincenza's daughter, Isabella, and she had already been delivered by her guardians into the hands of Manfred, that he might celebrate the wedding as soon as Conrad's infirm state of health would permit. Manfred's impatience for this ceremonial was remarked by his family and neighbours. The former, indeed, apprehending the severity of their prince's disposition, did not dare to utter their surmises on this precipitation. Hippolyta, his wife, an amiable lady, did sometimes venture to represent the danger of marrying their only son so early, considering his great youth and greater infirmities, but she never received any other answer than reflections on her own sterility, who had given him but one heir. His tenants and subjects were less cautious in their discourses. They attributed this hasty wedding to the prince's dread of seeing accomplished an ancient prophecy, which was said to have pronounced that the castle and lordship of Otranto should pass from the present family whenever the real owner should be grown too large to inhabit it. It was difficult to make any sense of this prophecy, and still less easy to conceive what it had to do with the marriage in question. Yet these mysteries, or contradictions, did not make the populace adhere the less to their opinion. Young Conrad's birthday was fixed for his espousals. The company was assembled in the chapel of the castle, and everything ready for beginning the divine office, when Conrad himself was missing. Manfred, impatient at the least delay, and who had not observed his son retire, dispatched one of his attendants to summon the young prince. The servant, who had not stayed long enough to have crossed the court to Conrad's apartment, came running back, breathless and in a frantic manner, his eyes staring and foaming at the mouth. He said nothing, but pointed to the court. The company was struck with terror and amazement. The Princess Hippolyta, without knowing what was the matter but anxious for her son, swooned away. Manfred, less apprehensive than enraged at the procrastination of the nuptials and at the folly of his domestic, asked imperiously what was the matter. The fellow made no answer, but continued pointing towards the courtyard, and at last, after repeated questions put to him, cried out, "The helmet! The helmet!" In the meantime, some of the company had run into the court, from whence was heard a confused noise of shrieks, horror, and surprise. Manfred, who began to be alarmed at not seeing his son, went himself to get information on what occasioned this strange confusion. Matilda remained, endeavouring to assist her mother, and Isabella stayed for the same purpose, and to avoid showing any impatience for the bridegroom, for whom, in truth, she had conceived little affection. The first thing that struck Manfred's eye was a group of his servants endeavouring to raise something that appeared to him a mountain of sable plumes. He gazed without believing his sight. "What are you doing?" cried Manfred wrathfully. "Where is my son?" A volley of voices replied, "Oh, my lord, the prince, the helmet!" Shocked with these lamentable sounds, and dreading he knew not what, he advanced hastily. But what a sight for a father's eyes! He beheld his child dashed to pieces, and almost buried under an enormous helmet, 100 times more large than any casque ever made for human being, and shaded with a proportional quantity of black feathers. The horror of the spectacle, the ignorance of all around how this misfortune had happened, and above all the tremendous phenomenon before him, took away the prince's speech. Yet his silence lasted longer than even grief could occasion. He fixed his eyes on what he wished in vain to believe a vision, and seemed less attentive to his loss than buried in meditation on the stupendous object that had occasioned it. He touched, he examined the fatal casque, nor could even the bleeding, mangled remains of the young prince divert the eyes of Manfred from the portent before him. All who had known his partial fondness for young Conrad were as much surprised at their prince's insensibility as thunderstruck themselves at the miracle of the helmet. They conveyed the disfigured corpse into the hall without receiving the least direction from Manfred. As little was he attentive to the ladies who remained in the chapel. On the contrary, without mentioning the unhappy princesses, his wife and daughter, the first sounds that dropped from Manfred's lips were, "Take care of the Lady Isabella." I'm just going to skip ahead a little moment now to the next bit, when Manfred has called to him Isabella, the woman who was about to marry his son. She goes to attend him. As it was now the evening, the servant who conducted Isabella bore a torch before her. When they came to Manfred, who was walking impatiently about the gallery, he started and said hastily, "Take away that light, and be gone." Then, shutting the door impetuously, he flung himself upon a bench against the wall and bade Isabella sit by him. She obeyed, trembling. "I sent for you, lady," said he, and then stopped under great appearance of confusion. "My lord?" "Yes, I sent for you on a matter of great moment," resumed he. "Dry your tears, young lady. You have lost your bridegroom. Yes, cruel fate, and I have lost the hopes of my race, but Conrad was not worthy of your beauty." "How, my lord?" said Isabella. "Sure, you do not suspect me of not feeling the concern I ought. My duty and affection would have always—" "Think no more of him," interrupted Manfred. "He was a sickly, puny child, and heaven has perhaps taken him away that I might not trust the honours of my house on so frail a foundation. The line of Manfred calls for numerous supports. My foolish fondness for that boy blinded the eyes of my prudence. But it is better as it is. I hope in a few years to have reason to rejoice at the death of Conrad." Words cannot paint the astonishment of Isabella. At first she apprehended that grief had disordered Manfred's understanding. Her next thought suggested that this strange discourse was designed to ensnare her. She feared that Manfred had perceived her indifference for his son, and in consequence of that idea she replied, "Good my lord, do not doubt my tenderness. My heart would have accompanied my hand. Conrad would have engrossed all my care, and wherever fate shall dispose of me, I shall always cherish his memory, and regard your highness and the virtuous Hippolyta as my parents." "Curse on Hippolyta!" cried Manfred. "Forget her from this moment, as I do. In short, lady, you have missed a husband undeserving of your charms. They shall now be better disposed of. Instead of a sickly boy, you shall have a husband in the prime of his age, who will know how to value your beauties, and who may expect a numerous offspring." "Alas, my lord," said Isabella, "my mind is too sadly engrossed by the recent catastrophe in your family to think of another marriage. If ever my father returns, and it shall be his pleasure, I shall obey, as I did when I consented to give my hand to your son. But until his return, permit me to remain under your hospitable roof, and employ the melancholy hours in assuaging yours, Hippolyta's, and the fair Matilda's affliction." "I desired you once before," said Manfred angrily, "not to name that woman. From this hour she must be a stranger to you, as she must be to me. In short, Isabella, since I cannot give you my son, I offer you myself." "Heavens!" cried Isabella, waking from her delusion. "What do I hear? You, my lord, my father-in-law, the father of Conrad, the husband of the virtuous and tender Hippolyta." "I tell you," said Manfred imperiously, "Hippolyta is no longer my wife. I divorce her from this hour, too long as she cursed me by her unfruitfulness. My fate depends on having sons, and this night I trust will give a new date to my hopes." At those words he seized the cold hand of Isabella, who was half dead with fright and horror. She shrieked. She shrieked and started from him. Manfred rose to pursue her. But he didn't. But why? You'll have to read it to find out. We didn't skip much in the middle there, apart from some following the ladies, watching them cry, and what happened to another character, Theodore. But that would have been a whole other subplot we were introducing. Just from the reading there, hopefully you can see some of the elements which were to form part of this novel, but also a lot of the Gothic novels going forward. You've got these motifs here of the supernatural, of course. The supernatural, the real supernatural, would to some extent fade away a little bit for a while from the Gothic after this. There were certainly critiques of the exuberance and the over-exaggeration of his supernatural by writers like Clara Reeve, who wrote The Old English Baron as a sort of correction to his excess. But you've also got these other underlying themes, questions of familial relations, this kind of lurking danger of incestual relations. You've also got concepts of usurpation. Manfred is so worried because the castle really shouldn't be his, and there's a curse upon him and his family because they are, well, their grandfather was a usurper. You're also going to find in the Castle of Otranto lots of the other motifs and tropes of the Gothic, which will continue in popularity even up to the present day, really. But certainly in that early British Gothic, where you've got castles with secret tunnels leading to ecclesiastical buildings, you've got virtuous women running around, literally running around, away from pursuing men. And you've also got sort of these explorations of questions of hereditary atmospheres, of claustrophobia. These, in this early period, these very virtuous heroes who stand against everything that is wrong in the form of a character like Manfred. And just before I leave, it's interesting to note, of course, that Manfred stayed a popular name within this sort of genre. It stayed a name which you'll find reoccurring within the Gothic and Romantic literature with a capital R. The most famous example of that is probably Byron's poem Manfred, which is a treat. Again, you have got incest, you've got magic, you've got demons, you've got tortured men. It's great. It's really fun. And I recommend that you read that. The Castle of Otranto, if you don't enjoy it, don't let that put you off Gothic literature. It's a very different feel. You can tell from the beginning that there's so much excess. This helmet that falls from the sky, I guess, and just absolutely smushes Conrad to death. And his father is like, but the helmet though, let us look at the helmet. And just sort of like, I imagine him like walking past the squish remains of his son to look better at the helmet. I don't know. There's a lot of excess bordering on the comic, and that's not obviously what you're going to find necessarily later on. So don't let it put you off if you didn't enjoy it. But if you did enjoy it, go read the whole thing. And I look forward to seeing your comments and debates underneath this video. Again, please be kind. I'll be deleting any abusive or negative comments, obviously. So, goodbye.